In this Diablo 4 video, I'm going to be showing you 10 things you should know before you start playing the game very shortly, and these are things from which difficulty to start the game on, whether to push the main story or to do side content, where to find Altars of Lilith, which dungeons to do, what to do with your extra gear, whether you should respec or not, what legendary aspects to get, and so on. These are very, very helpful for minimizing and maximizing your time playing the game so that you're not wasting a lot of time backtracking and, wishing you would have known these things earlier. However, one quick thing before I get into that is that you should definitely take some time and pick the class that you want. We actually are going to have a video that'll be up on the channel that you can find that will show you how each class plays at endgame. A lot of people have seen how the beginning of the game is with characters, but they haven't seen how they play at endgame. And it's not a bad video to check out if you want to get a sense of how characters or classes play in the endgame before you pick one. Okay, so if you've just started the game, the first thing that you're going to want to decide is what difficulty you want to play the game on. Do you want to play on Tier 1 or Tier 2? Tier 2 gives you extra experience and extra gold, but enemies are harder to kill. And in my opinion, if you're just starting out with Diablo and you haven't played before, Tier 1 is probably the better way to go, because you'll actually get through enemies more quickly, which will actually, get you about the same amount of experience and gold as you would on Tier 2 anyway, just because you're moving through the content faster. So if you're not sure which difficulty to go with, I would start out on Tier 1, and then if you decide it's too easy for you or whatever, you can move up to Tier 2, but I think it's better to do it that way than to start on Tier 2, realize it's too difficult for you or you're not sure what you're doing, and then move back down to Tier 1. And if you're wondering how to change this, like maybe you decided you want to go up to Tier 2, or maybe you want to drop down to Tier 1, if you go to the World Tier statue in Kyovashad, which is just north of the waypoint, you can change this at any time. The next thing I want to talk about is whether you should push the main story and try and complete it before doing side content, or whether you should do side content, whether you should do group events, world bosses, how you get your mount, etc., and I'm going to cover that in this section. So the first thing you should know is that once you complete the main story campaign through all of the acts of the game, you'll have the option to skip the campaign for any additional characters that you made. So this is really nice because there are certain areas of the game that you can't access until you progress the main story. It's not very many places, but there are a few, and once you skip this on additional characters, those places are not locked out to you anymore, and you actually have a lot of waypoints that you can fast travel to. Additionally, as you push much further into the main quest, you will also unlock your mount, and once you have this mount unlocked, it's unlocked for all your characters. So that's something that can be very beneficial to you, as it'll help you speed around the landscape a lot faster. Those things being said, though, I do think there's a case to do some side content as you're progressing through the main campaign, and that's because each section or zone of the game has a reputation system, and as you progress in that reputation system, you unlock skill points, more potions for your character to hold so you can heal more often. And these are account-wide, so any characters you play outside of this will also have these skill points, and this makes your character stronger, which makes you easier to do bosses, to do world bosses, and things like that. So I think you should probably, focus on doing side quests, finding Altars of Lilith, doing strongholds, which generate a lot of reputation. Strongholds are really important, so make sure you use the interactive map to find where those are, and go clear those along the way till you get to at least reputation rank 3, so you can get those valuable skill points and extra potions before continuing on and progressing the main story. And you can obviously do the main story and do the side quests on the way to the main story as well, but I would try and get to rank 3 reputation in each zone before continuing on in the main story if it moves you to a new section. Talking about group events, I don't think that they're very valuable to you as a low-level character because you're going to gain some experience from them and you're going to get Murmuring Ovals, which you can gamble at the vendor for these in order to try and get legendary equipment. However, at very low levels, you typically don't roll legendaries. As your character level raises, it seems like the chances to roll a legendary are higher, so I wouldn't worry too much about these until you're about level 30 or so. But that's not to say that, you can't jump on one that's already active on a way that, you're going towards a main quest or side quest and it happens to be right there. Definitely recommend hopping in and banging one out real quick if it's just on the way. But I wouldn't seek out these and farm these, at the beginning of the game. There's just not a lot of point. And one last point on this is world bosses. If you see world bosses up in your game world, drop whatever you're doing and go do the world boss. They not only give you legendaries, they have a weekly lock that gives you another chest that gives you even more legendaries, and they can give you very valuable crafting materials to upgrade your gear, so make sure you do world bosses anytime you see them on the map. And the next point is sort of piggybacking off the previous point, which is Altars of Lilith. You want to make sure that you find these on your first character as much as possible. And the reason I say that is they contribute to reputation, which is very good, and again, reputation is not shared between characters, so if you get a region up to reputation rank 2 and it's almost to rank 3 and then you start another character, you'll have to get all the way from Reputation 0 up to Reputation 3 again in order to get that third bonus. Like, they don't add together to give you a group bonus towards Reputation. So it's very important to do this on one character, and Altars of Lilith work the same way, except that the bonuses you gain from Altars of Lilith apply to all of your characters. However, they're not marked on the map on your other characters, so you can't see which ones you've gotten and which ones you haven't on subsequent characters. So you want to try and do them on your main character first, if possible. So you want to use the interactive map and find these along the way in each zone before you move on to the next zone, so that you get all these extra stat bonuses, and you're not like looking for that one or two that you don't know where they are that you're missing on your subsequent characters. Next, I want to talk a little bit about dungeons and which ones you should focus on at the beginning of the game. And one of them I think everyone should do is the Lost Archive. This is not very far into the game at all, and it provides you with the aspect of the Protector in the Codex of Power, allowing you to put this legendary aspect on, one of your pieces of gear from the very beginning of the game. This is a very, very strong defensive aspect that gives you a damage shield or a bubble when you damage an elite, and this happens all the time. So this is a great aspect for just about anyone, and you definitely want to go get this as soon as you can. Now, other dungeons you should do are going to depend on the class that you're playing. So you can open up your Codex of Power, look through the aspects there, and see which ones benefit the build that you're trying to put together. And you can actually put a pin on them, and then on the map of the game world, it will show you where to go to get to those dungeons. Some of them may be very, very far away, and you might not want to try and do them early on, but there are some that are close for just about every class, and you should try and focus on those ones if they help your build. Otherwise, you'll be doing these dungeons a lot more later at end game, so there isn't a reason to just do them, unless maybe you know you're going to be playing like another class very soon, and you want to unlock a legendary aspect for the Codex of Power for them. But otherwise, try not to do these too much, because you're going to be doing them a lot later, and you don't want to burn out on them. Next, I want to talk a bit about what to do with your extra gear. Obviously, as you go through the game, you're going to get tons of loot. You're going to get common, magic, rare, legendary loot, and what you do with it is really important. At the beginning of the game, I think it's more important to decon your extra gear, except for your legendary items, which you should just hang on to for now. But your rares, magic, and commons, you should decon to get crafting materials. And as you start to get a little bit higher level, like 20, 25, then you want to consider selling some of them to get more gold. You'll get more gold on items at that level, but you'll still get crafting materials at low level. And from that point onward, you're going to want to balance harvesting them for their materials or, selling them for gold, so that you have enough gold and enough materials to upgrade and craft the things that you want. And you'll kind of go back and forth on these. And again, I would hang on to the legendary aspects or the legendary equipment that you gain, so that you might use it later even though you're not using it currently or on another build, or you might decide to try a different build later. So don't deconstruct it and then regret it. Hang on to your legendaries for the moment. And a point that's sort of similar to this is that you shouldn't be afraid to respec and try new builds and setups at the beginning of the game. Respecking is very cheap. It gets expensive later, but it's very cheap early on in the game. And if your build is just not working for you, don't stick it out. Change it up. Try different things. You'd be surprised how even just changing one skill in this game can make a huge difference to your build. So don't be afraid to mess around and try new builds, and maybe some of those legendaries that you are hoarding, maybe they'll come in handy when you try a new build. So talking a little bit more about legendary equipment and legendary aspects, the Codex of Power legendary aspects are basically the weakest legendary aspects you're going to get in the game. And I'm not talking about the type of bonuses they provide, but I'm just talking about the actual values of those bonuses. They are always the minimum value. So they're enough to get you going like at the beginning of the game for your build, but eventually you want to try and find dropped versions of those same ones that apply to your build, because they typically roll higher values. Almost always will they roll higher value, giving you the same benefit, but a better version of that benefit. There are also other legendary aspects that are only dropped, meaning that you cannot get them on the Codex of Power. So the Codex of Power is not the only legendary aspects that you can gain, and you're going to find more as you progress the game more and more that might, change your build completely that you didn't know were available to you. And you can look on the wiki ahead of time and see what these legendary aspects are, so that you can sort of theory craft your build and plan ahead, but you're going to gain more legendary aspects that are not in the Codex of Power later. And another thing I want to mention is that there are different types of legendary aspects. You have offensive, defensive, utility, and resource, and these basically do what you would think they do. Offensive increases your damage some way, defensive protects you, utility is just good for general things, and then resource helps you generate more resources, which is vital for just about every build. These different types of aspects can only be slotted onto with your Codex of Power, or from salvaging them at the occultists from other legendary weapons. They can only be slotted on specific types. For instance, the offensive aspects can only be slotted on weapons, gloves, amulets, and rings. And something else that's important to know is that your two-handed weapon will actually give you 100% power increase to any aspect you put on it, whereas a one-handed will only give you 100%. So if you have a bonus that you really, really like, and you want more or a stronger version of it, you can put it on a two-handed weapon to get more effectiveness. And amulets provide a 50% power increase, so if you have something that's maybe not quite as good as the thing you want on two-handed, but still something you want more than a regular aspect, if you can put it on your amulet, you'll get even more. Now, not every legendary aspect can go on every spot, but you get the idea. You want to try and put your two strongest on your weapon, two-handed if possible, and your amulet. And another thing, it's possible to find a really good legendary aspect on a really terrible weapon, and as I mentioned, you can go to the occultist and you can actually salvage off that legendary aspect and completely deconstruct the weapon in the process, but then you can take that aspect and put it onto a better weapon later on if you have like a really, really good aspect. So you're going to want to hang on to your legendaries until you're sure what you want to do, and then you'll probably salvage some of them off and put them on other things. You're not just going to deconstruct your legendaries. And one last tip is that you can take these legendary aspects and you don't have to put them on another legendary weapon. You can put them on a rare item at the occultist as well to turn it into a legendary item. Now, it typically has less bonuses as a whole, not the legendary aspect itself, but other bonuses on the gear. But you can convert rares into legendary aspects using like the Codex of Power or legendary aspects you've salvaged off other legendary items, and you should do this often. So the next thing I want to mention is upgrading, enchanting, and bonuses on your equipment. If you didn't know, in this game, you can actually upgrade all of the equipment you wear. This is the weapons you're using, the armor you're using, the jewelry you're using. You can upgrade it all. You can upgrade armor and weapons at the blacksmith, and you can upgrade the jewelry at the jeweler. And this is really, really important because when you have good bonuses on like a piece of jewelry or a piece of armor or whatever, upgrading that will not only give you more protection, but it will also give you more value for those bonuses. So for instance, maybe you have a ring with like lucky hit chance, critical hit chance, and critical damage on it, which is really strong. If you upgrade that, you'll get more lucky hit chance, more critical strike chance, and critical damage. And the more you upgrade it, the more you'll get out of it. So make sure you upgrade the ones that you know are really, really good. Like, I wouldn't bother upgrading something that's got like one bonus you really like. But if it has like 2 or 3 bonuses that are really good for your build, those are the ones you want to be on the lookout for upgrading. And you want to pay really close attention to the bonuses that you have on your gear. For instance, if you are a character that does a lot of crowd control, maybe you slow a lot of enemies all the time. Well, finding damage to slowed enemies is really good on your gear, or damage to crowd control, because slow is a type of crowd control. And if you didn't know, like staffs, for instance, have a default bonus to crowd control damage. So that's really good against slowed enemies. So you might want to use a staff if you slow enemies all the time. So paying attention to those bonuses is also important. But another thing is maybe you have a bonus on there like damage to frozen and you don't freeze anything ever. Well, you can go over to the occultist and you can go and enchant your gear and remove that bonus and replace it with a random other bonus. It's very not expensive to do once, and it gets crazy expensive to do repeatedly. So I usually try and do it once on gear where I have like 2 or 3 good bonuses, but the 4th bonus isn't very good, or a 3rd bonus isn't very good. But make sure you go over there and swap them out if you have like a really good piece, and see if you can make it just a little bit better. The next thing I want to talk about is elixirs, incenses, and potions. If you didn't know, in this game, you can go to the herbalist and you can craft elixirs and incenses, and you can upgrade your potions to heal you more with the materials that you find around the map. And elixirs provide you usually with like a defensive bonus or an offensive bonus, as well as experience gain, and they have certain like level requirements, so you can't use all of them at the beginning. But these are very, very good, particularly around endgame, when you know, like you go into a dungeon and you know that all the enemy type in a dungeon is one particular type. You can use a potion or an elixir that will increase your damage against that enemy type, which is really good. And incenses are something you'll use at higher levels that will provide bonuses depending on how many characters there are around you. And they're really good for like world bosses and stuff like that, where you have a lot of players stacked up. So you want to use those where applicable, particularly the elixirs early on, and you want to make sure you upgrade your potions to be stronger healing as your level goes up. And the last thing I want to talk about is gems and gem slots. Just about every piece of equipment in the game can be upgraded to have at least 1 gem slot. I believe helmets have 1, chest pieces have 2, legs have 2. All jewelry has 1 slot you can upgrade to. One-handed weapons you can have at least 1, and two-handed weapons you can have at least 2, regardless of what they roll when they drop. So you can go to the jeweler and you can add these to it if you have the materials to do that. So consider doing that on your best pieces. As you're leveling the game, you shouldn't spend all your limited resource to add slots to a gear that you're going to replace quickly. But if you have some really good pieces, consider adding a gem slot and then slotting some gems into it. And obviously what gems you slot are going to depend on what sort of build you have. If you're running like a werebear, for instance, you might use overpower, or maybe you have a build that uses a lot of basic skills, then maybe basic skill damage is good for you. or maybe 1 damage over time. There are a lot of good things you can slot into your equipment, and that's obviously going to depend on your build. But just letting you know that you can add equipment or gem slots to your equipment is very, very important, and you're definitely going to do this more and more as you level up, and you'll do it very selectively as you're leveling through the game. So that wraps up our beginner guide, kind of giving you 10 things you should know before you go into the game. I hope that gave you some information that can help you with your build as you play, so that you don't feel like you're struggling and you're not wasting materials, and you're not sure like how much should I progress the main story, or should I clear every zone before going on with the main story. Hope that just gave you some useful information so you can make those decisions for yourself and what's best for you. If you guys have any other questions, please let me know in the comments below. We do have a giveaway running for the game for 5 collector's boxes of the game, so make sure you sign up for that. And make sure you also bookmark the wiki and the interactive map, because I guarantee you you're going to need them throughout the playthrough of this game.